The smoke billowed high above Emma Owens' family's barn, turning the Nevada twilight into an inferno of orange and red that could be seen for miles across the desert plains. She never intended to be there when the fire started, but fate had other plans on that scorching summer evening in 1875. From the highest ridge overlooking Lovelock, Owen Thornton spotted the blaze through his spyglass, his heart dropping at the familiar location. Without hesitation, he spurred his stallion forward, racing down the hillside toward the Owens homestead, knowing full well what or rather who might be trapped inside. Emma coughed violently as the acrid smoke filled her lungs. She had only come to fetch more feed for the pregnant mare in the stable when an overturned lantern, knocked by a startled rat, had ignited the dry hay faster than she could stamp it out. Now the barn's entire eastern wall was engulfed, and the only exit blocked by falling, flaming debris. "Help!" She screamed, though she knew the nearest neighbor was too far to hear. Her father and brothers had gone to Carson City for supplies and wouldn't return until tomorrow. Emma frantically searched for another way out, pressing herself against the back wall as the heat intensified. The wooden beams above groaned ominously. The 20-year-old pressed a damp handkerchief to her mouth, the simple cotton dress she wore offering no protection against the sweltering heat. The frightened horses kicked at their stalls, adding to the chaos as she tried to maintain her composure. "Hold on!" A deep voice shouted from outside, barely audible over the crackling flames through watery eyes. Emma glimpsed a figure on horseback circling the barn, searching for an entry point. She recognized Owen Thornton, the 30-year-old rancher whose property bordered her family's land. The man her father had forbidden her to speak with due to an old feud over water rights. "Owen," she called out, hope surging through her terror. "The back wall. There's a loading door." Owen dismounted with fluid grace, tying his bandana around his face before approaching the inferno. The loading door was partially blocked by fallen timber, but he could see it wasn't yet consumed by flames. With determination born of desperation, he braced himself and charged forward. The heat hit him like a physical force, singeing his eyebrows and the exposed skin of his forearms. Through the smoke, he caught sight of Emma's pale face and outstretched hand. Ignoring the searing pain as embers landed on his skin, Owen shoved aside a burning beam and fought his way toward her. "Take my hand," he shouted, extending his arm through the gap he'd created. Emma lunged forward, choking on smoke, her fingers brushing his before another section of the roof collapsed, sending up a shower of sparks. She screamed and fell back. Owen didn't hesitate. He kicked at the remaining boards blocking the door until they splintered, creating just enough space for him to squeeze through. Inside, the roar of the fire was deafening. The air was nearly unbreathable. "Emma," he called, dropping to his knees where the air was slightly clearer. He crawled toward her slumped form. She was barely conscious when he reached her, her face streaked with soot and tears. Owen gathered her into his arms, her weight slight against his chest. "Hold on to me," he instructed, and felt her arms weakly circle his neck. The way back seemed impossibly far as the barn continued to collapse around them. Owen staggered to his feet, clutching Emma tightly. He could feel the heat through his boots, knew his jacket was smoking in places. His horse had fled from the intensity of the fire, leaving them without a quick escape. "We'll make it," he promised, though he wasn't certain how. With a desperate surge of strength, Owen charged through the gap in the loading door just as a massive beam crashed down where they had been standing seconds before. The force of the collapsing timber sent them tumbling onto the hard, packed earth outside. For several moments, they lay there gasping, the cool evening air a blessed relief after the furnace of the barn. Owen recovered first, pulling Emma farther from the burning structure as the entire roof gave way with a tremendous crash, sending a fountain of sparks skyward. "My father's horses," Emma whispered, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on her face. "I'll try," Owen said, but even as he spoke, the last supporting wall of the barn collapsed inward. There was no chance any living thing inside had survived. Emma began to sob from shock, from grief, and from the pain of her burns. Owen held her gently, his own hands blistered and raw. "Let's get you to the house," he said. "You need care for those burns." He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as they slowly made their way to the Owens family's modest homestead. Behind them, the barn continued to burn, illuminating the night sky with its fierce glow. Inside the house, Owen helped Emma to a chair and quickly found clean cloths and a bucket. He pumped water from the kitchen pump and returned to her side, gently beginning to clean the worst of her burns. "Why were you up on the ridge?" Emma asked, her voice hoarse from smoke. "That's not your usual route home." Owen paused, cloth in hand. "I was watching your place," he admitted. "I do sometimes when I'm worried about you." Emma studied his face, the strong lines of his jaw now smudged with ash, the intensity in his blue eyes. "Why would you worry about me? Our families haven't spoken in 5 years. "That doesn't mean I stopped caring," he said quietly. "Not ever." The simple honesty in his voice made something shift inside Emma's chest. They had been childhood friends before the feud, and perhaps something more in those tender years of early adolescence before their fathers had forbidden their friendship. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my life." Owen nodded, resuming his gentle ministrations. "I couldn't let anything happen to you." As he cleaned her injuries, Emma noticed how his hands trembled slightly. The adrenaline was wearing off, revealing the extent of his own pain. Without thinking, she caught his wrist, turning his palm upward to examine the angry blisters forming there. "You're hurt worse than I am," she said. Owen shrugged. "It's nothing. It's not nothing." Emma took the cloth from him and dipped it in the cool water. With gentle strokes, she began cleaning his burns, aware of how he winced but didn't pull away. They sat in silence for several minutes, tending to each other's wounds by the soft light of the kerosene lamp. Outside, the fire had begun to die down, having consumed everything in the barn. "What will your father say?" Owen asked finally. "About the barn and about me being here?" Emma met his gaze. "I don't know," she answered truthfully. "But you saved my life. Even he can't argue with that." Owen looked doubtful. Jonathan Owens was a proud, stubborn man who held grudges with religious fervor. The water dispute that had divided their families had only been the catalyst for a deeper animosity that had festered for years. "I should go," Owen said reluctantly, standing. "Your father will be back tomorrow and you'll need to rest." "Stay," Emma said, surprising herself with the boldness of her request. "Please, I don't want to be alone tonight, not after what happened." Owen hesitated, torn between propriety and his unwillingness to leave her. "The neighbors will talk," he warned. "Let them," Emma replied, suddenly too exhausted to care about reputation or feuds. "You can sleep in my brother's room. I keep seeing the flames when I close my eyes." Understanding softened Owen's expression. "All right," he agreed. "But I'll leave at first light, before anyone sees me here." Emma nodded gratefully. She showed him to her brother David's room, found him a clean shirt that might fit his broader shoulders, and bid him good night with a lingering touch on his arm. The simple contact sent a flutter through her stomach that had nothing to do with the evening's trauma. In her own room, as she changed into a nightgown and climbed into bed, Emma couldn't stop thinking about the way Owen had risked his life without hesitation. About the gentleness of his hands as he tended her burns, about the intensity in his eyes when he said he'd been watching over her. sleep came fitfully, punctuated by nightmares of flames and collapsing timbers. Twice she woke gasping, the phantom smell of smoke filling her nostrils. The second time she found Owen standing in her doorway, concern etched on his features. "I heard you cry out," he explained. "Are you all right?" Emma nodded, embarrassed. "Just dreams." Owen took a tentative step into the room. "Would it help if I sat with you for a while?" It was improper. They both knew it, but Emma nodded gratefully. Owen settled into the rocking chair beside her bed, his presence a solid comfort in the darkness. "Tell me something," she requested softly. "Something good to keep the nightmares away." Owen was quiet for a moment, then began speaking of his ranch, of the improvements he'd made, of the wild horses he'd been taming. His deep voice washed over her like a soothing balm, and eventually, Emma drifted back to sleep, feeling safer than she had in years. When she woke in the morning, he was gone, as promised. The only evidence of his presence was a note on the kitchen table. "I'll check on you later. Be well. O.T." Emma traced the letters with her fingertip, a strange longing filling her chest. She knew their family's feud wouldn't simply disappear overnight, but something had changed between them in the fire's crucible. Something that felt dangerously like the rekindling of feelings she'd thought long extinguished. She had just finished making coffee when she heard the wagon approaching. Her father and brothers were home, a day early. Emma steeled herself for the difficult conversation ahead, knowing that explaining the barn's destruction was only part of what needed to be said. Jonathan Owens was a bear of a man, his once dark hair now liberally streaked with gray. His face, weathered by years under the Nevada sun, fell as he took in the smoldering remains of their barn. "What in God's name happened?" he demanded, leaping from the wagon before it had fully stopped. Emma met him at the door, her burns bandaged with strips of clean cotton. "There was an accident," she began. "A lantern fell." Her father's eyes narrowed as he assessed her injuries. "You were inside. How did you get out?" This was the moment of truth. Emma took a deep breath. "Owen Thornton saw the fire from his property. He came and pulled me out." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Jonathan's face flushed dark with anger. "Thornton, you let that man onto our property." "He saved my life, Father," Emma said firmly. "I would have died in that fire if not for him." Her brothers, David and Samuel, exchanged glances behind their father's back. At 25 and 23, they had their own opinions about the feud but rarely voiced them in their father's presence. "Where is he now?" Jonathan demanded. "He left at dawn," Emma replied. "After making sure I was all right." Jonathan paced the small kitchen, agitation evident in every movement. "I suppose I'll have to thank him," he muttered, as if the prospect physically pained him. "Yes, you will," Emma agreed, surprising herself with her boldness. "He was badly burned rescuing me." Jonathan stopped pacing and studied his daughter's face. Something in her expression must have given her away, for his eyes narrowed suspiciously. "This doesn't change anything between our families," he warned. "A decent act doesn't erase years of wrongdoing." Emma bit her tongue. This was not the time to remind her father that the wrongdoing had been greatly exaggerated on both sides. A simple dispute over water rights that had spiraled into bitter enmity fueled by pride more than actual grievances. "The horses?" David asked, changing the subject. Emma shook her head sadly. "All lost. The pregnant mare, too." A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. The loss was devastating, financially and emotionally. Those horses had been the foundation of their small breeding operation, representing years of careful selection and training. "We'll rebuild," Jonathan said finally, his voice gruff with emotion he rarely displayed. "We've faced worse." Emma wasn't so sure. The loss of the barn and horses would set them back significantly. They had some savings, but not enough to replace everything. As if reading her thoughts, Samuel spoke up. "Maybe we should consider Thornton's offer from last year," he suggested cautiously, "about joining our lands for the shared water rights." Jonathan's face darkened again. "Never," he snapped. "I'd sooner sell everything and move to California." Emma and her brothers knew better than to press the issue. Their father's stubborn pride had shaped their lives for years, keeping them isolated when cooperation might have benefited everyone. "I'm going to start clearing the debris," David said, eager to escape the tension. Samuel followed him out, leaving Emma alone with her father. Jonathan sank heavily into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 55 years. "You could have died," he said, his voice softer now. Emma placed a hand on his shoulder. "But I didn't, thanks to Owen." Her father covered her hand with his own, rough and calloused from decades of ranch work. "I'll thank him properly," he promised. "But that's all, Emma. Don't go getting ideas about friendship or anything else." Emma didn't respond. Her father didn't need to know that all through the night, as Owen had sat beside her bed keeping the nightmares at bay. She'd been getting ideas about much more than friendship. 3 days later, the Thornton wagon appeared at the edge of the Owens property. Emma spotted it from where she was hanging laundry, her heart quickening at the sight of Owen himself driving the team of sturdy draft horses. He stopped at a respectful distance and waited, clearly uncertain of his welcome. Emma glanced toward the half-collapsed barn where her father and brothers were working, then made her decision. She walked across the yard to meet him. "Good morning," she said, shielding her eyes from the sun. Owen tipped his hat, a smile warming his features. "Miss Owens," he greeted formally, though his eyes held a warmth that was anything but distant. "How are your burns healing?" "Better," she replied, showing him her hands, which were now only lightly bandaged. "And yours?" He flexed his hands on the reins. "Getting there, your father around?" Emma nodded toward the barn ruins. "Over there. He's expecting you, though he won't admit it." Owen's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Is he now?" "He knows he needs to thank you," Emma explained. "And I think he's curious about why you were in position to see our barn fire in the first place." A flush crept up Owen's neck. "And what did you tell him about that?" "That you happened to be riding near the ridge," Emma said with a small smile. "I left out the part about you watching over me." Relief and something else flickered across Owen's face. "I brought lumber," he said, gesturing to the wagon bed loaded with fresh-cut pine. "And some tools. Thought I might help with the rebuilding." Emma's eyes widened. "That's very generous, but my father—" "Your father can accept help from a neighbor, or he can watch his family struggle through winter without proper shelter for what livestock you have left," Owen interrupted, a new firmness in his voice. "I'm not doing this to win any favor, Emma. I'm doing it because it's right." Before she could respond, Jonathan emerged from the barn site, wiping his hands on a rag. He spotted Owen and walked over, his expression carefully neutral. "Thornton," he greeted stiffly. "Owens," Owen replied with equal formality. The two men sized each other up, years of animosity crackling between them. Emma held her breath, praying that her father would remember his promise to be civil. "I hear I owe you my daughter's life," Jonathan said finally. Owen shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." "I did what anyone would do." "Not anyone would run into a burning building," Jonathan countered. "So, thank you." The words seemed physically painful for him to say, but they were sincere. Owen accepted them with a nod. "I brought lumber," he said, indicating his wagon. "And I'd like to help rebuild. My men and I can have a new barn up before the first frost if you'll allow it." Jonathan's pride warred visibly with practicality on his weathered face. Emma silently urged her father to accept, knowing they couldn't manage the rebuild alone, not with harvest approaching. "Why?" Jonathan asked bluntly. Why help us after all these years? Owen met his gaze steadily. Because we're neighbors, whether we act like it or not. Because my father's quarrel doesn't have to be mine forever. And because Emma deserves better than to worry about where your remaining stock will shelter this winter. The mention of Emma seemed to touch something in Jonathan. He glanced at his daughter, noting the hopeful expression she couldn't quite hide. "We can't pay you," Jonathan said, his tone indicating this was as close to acceptance as he would come. "I'm not asking for payment," Owen replied. "Just the chance to make things right." After a long moment, Jonathan nodded curtly. "We start at dawn tomorrow," he said, then turned and walked back toward the barn site, his back stiff with unspoken emotions. Emma exhaled slowly. "That went better than I expected," she admitted. Owen's smile returned, warming his eyes. "He didn't shoot me, so I'd call it a victory." They shared a moment of quiet understanding before Owen cleared his throat. "I should unload the lumber," he said. "Your brother's around to help." "They rode to Carson City for supplies," Emma replied. "But I can help." Owen looked skeptical. "With those burns, they're healing," she insisted. "And I'm stronger than I look." Together, they began unloading the wagon, working in comfortable silence punctuated by occasional conversation. Owen told her about his ranch, about the new breeding program he'd started with quarter horses, about his dreams of expanding toward the western slopes where the grass grew thicker. Emma found herself sharing her own hopes for education beyond what the local school had provided. For travel to places she'd only read about in books. For a life that combined the ranch work she loved with the intellectual pursuits her father considered impractical for a woman. "You'd make a fine teacher," Owen observed as they carried the last of the lumber to the stack near the barn site. "Have you considered the new women's college in Sacramento?" Emma shook her head. "Father needs me here, especially now, and such schools are expensive." "Dreams are worth investing in," Owen said simply. Something in his tone made Emma glance up sharply. The intensity in his eyes suggested he might be speaking of dreams beyond education. She looked away first, her cheeks warming. "I should see about lunch," she said. "You'll stay?" Owen hesitated. "I should get back to my own place. Got fencing that needs mending before nightfall." "Tomorrow, then," Emma said, trying to hide her disappointment. Owen nodded, his eyes lingering on her face a moment longer than necessary before he turned to his wagon. Emma watched him go, aware of her father's gaze on her back from the barn site. She knew there would be questions, warnings, perhaps even prohibitions. But for the first time in years, she felt a sense of possibility that had nothing to do with barns or water rights. True to his word, Owen arrived at dawn the next day with 3 of his ranch hands. They set to work alongside Jonathan and his sons, the initial awkwardness gradually giving way to the rhythm of shared labor. Emma kept the men supplied with water and food, observing with quiet satisfaction how Owen's natural leadership and her father's experience complemented each other, despite their mutual wariness. By midday, the foundation was marked out, slightly larger than the original barn had been. Emma noticed her father consulting with Owen over the plans, their heads bent together over rough sketches in a moment of unexpected collaboration. "Might work at that," she heard her father grudgingly admit, as Owen suggested a modified design that would improve ventilation while requiring less lumber. The work continued for days, from sunrise to sunset. Emma found herself looking forward to each morning, to the sight of Owen's wagon appearing on the horizon, to the brief moments when their hands would touch as she passed him a cup of water or a plate of food. On the 5th day, a thunderstorm blew in from the mountains, forcing the men to secure what they'd built and seek shelter. Owen was the last to come in, soaked to the skin from ensuring the lumber was properly covered. "You'll catch your death," Emma scolded, handing him a towel as he dripped on the kitchen floor. "Worth it to hear you worry about me," he replied with a grin that made her heart skip. Her brothers snorted from the table where they were playing cards, while her father shot Owen a warning look that everyone pretended not to notice. "Samuel, fetch one of your shirts for Thornton before he floods the kitchen," Jonathan ordered. It was a small gesture, but significant. Offering clothes, even temporarily, was an act of hospitality that went beyond their grudging work arrangement. Owen seemed to recognize this, for he nodded gratefully to Jonathan before following Samuel to change. The storm showed no signs of abating, thunder rolling across the valley in waves that rattled the windows. Eventually, Jonathan reluctantly invited Owen and his men to stay for dinner rather than risk the treacherous ride home in such conditions. Dinner was a strained affair at first, with conversation limited to safe topics like the weather and the barn's progress. But as the meal progressed, the tension gradually eased. One of Owen's hands, a Mexican man named Miguel who had worked for the Thorntons for decades, began sharing stories of the early days in Lovelock Valley, before either the Owens or Thornton families had arrived. "The Paiute knew where to find water even in the driest years," Miguel recalled. "They showed your father," he nodded to Owen, "the underground springs that still feed both your ranches." Jonathan looked up sharply. "What do you mean, both our ranches? Thornton's spring is separate from ours." Miguel shook his head, amusement crinkling the corners of his eyes. "No, senor. Is same water, same source. The spring divides underground, comes up in two places, but it is one water." A heavy silence fell over the table as the implication sank in. The water dispute that had divided their families for 5 years was based on a misunderstanding of the very nature of the resource they were fighting over. Jonathan and Owen exchanged long looks, decades of hostility suddenly on uncertain ground. "Is this true?" Jonathan demanded. Owen shrugged. "I don't know. My father always claimed the water was solely on our property, that you were diverting it illegally. And my father believed your family was blocking the natural flow," Jonathan replied. "But if Miguel is right, we could have an engineer from Carson City verify it," Owen suggested cautiously. "See if he's right about it being one source." Another silence, this one thoughtful rather than hostile. Emma watched the emotions play across her father's face, doubt, consideration, and finally, a reluctant nod. "Might be worth knowing," Jonathan conceded, "though it doesn't change the past 5 years." "No," Owen agreed, "but it might change the next 5. The conversation shifted to safer topics after that, but Emma couldn't help noticing how her father seemed less rigid, how Owen's shoulders had relaxed slightly. It wasn't peace, not yet, but perhaps it was the beginning of understanding. The storm raged through the night, making it impossible for Owen and his men to return home. Jonathan gruffly offered them space in the house and stable, an unprecedented gesture that had Emma's brothers exchanging startled glances. As the household prepared for sleep, Emma found herself alone with Owen for a brief moment in the hallway. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being willing to stay, even with all the history." Owen's expression softened in the dim light of the oil lamp. "Some things are worth the discomfort," he replied, his gaze holding hers for a moment that stretched between them, full of unspoken meanings. Then Samuel appeared from his room, breaking the moment, and Owen bid her a polite good night before following him to the extra bedding. Emma lay awake long into the night, listening to the storm and thinking about underground springs, about how things that seemed separate could actually be connected in ways invisible to the eye, about how maybe people weren't so different. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. Work on the barn resumed with renewed energy, and Emma noticed a subtle shift in the dynamics between the men. There was still caution, still reserve, but the outright hostility had faded, replaced by a tentative cooperation born of shared purpose. 2 weeks later, the basic structure of the barn was complete. The men gathered to raise the final beam, their combined strength making relatively light work of what would have been an impossible task for either family alone. As the beam settled into place, a cheer went up from the workers. Jonathan, in a rare display of emotion, clapped Owen on the shoulder. "Couldn't have done it without your help," he admitted gruffly. "You're a good builder, Thornton." Owen accepted the compliment with grace. "Learned from my father, same as you taught your boys," he replied. The moment of camaraderie was brief but significant. Emma, watching from the yard, felt hope unfurling in her chest like a tender green shoot after a long winter. That evening, as Owen prepared to leave, he approached Emma where she was collecting eggs from the chicken coop. "I was wondering," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant, "if you might consider joining me for a ride tomorrow. There's something I'd like to show you." Emma glanced toward the house, where her father was occupied with accounts at the kitchen table. "I'm not sure my father would approve," she said reluctantly. "I've already asked his permission," Owen replied, surprising her. He wasn't exactly enthusiastic, but he didn't forbid it. Emma couldn't hide her astonishment. "You asked my father if you could court me." Owen's eyes crinkled at the corners. "I asked if I could show you the view from Widow's Peak. Whether it's courting or not depends on how you feel about it." Heat rose in Emma's cheeks. "I'd like that very much," she said softly. Owen's smile widened. "I'll come by after the morning chores, around 10. Emma nodded, unable to suppress her own smile. As Owen rode away, she hugged the secret joy to herself, scarcely believing the change in circumstances that had brought them to this moment. True to his word, Owen arrived promptly at 10 the next morning, leading a gentle mare for Emma alongside his own stallion. They set off toward the mountains, riding side by side through meadows still damp with morning dew. "Your father gave me quite the interrogation this morning," Owen remarked as they crossed a shallow stream. "Wanted to know my intentions." Emma nearly choked. "He didn't." "Oh, he did," Owen assured her, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Made me promise to have you home well before dark and to stay on public trails where others might see us." "I'm 20 years old, not 16, Emma protested, though she couldn't truly be angry at her father's protectiveness. "He cares about you," Owen said simply. "Can't fault him for that." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the rhythmic hoofbeats and the occasional call of a meadowlark. Emma found herself studying Owen's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way the sun brought out golden highlights in his brown hair. "You're staring," he observed without looking at her. Emma didn't look away. "I'm trying to reconcile the Owen Thornton I knew as a child with the man who rode into a burning building for me." Now, Owen did turn to meet her gaze. "They're the same person, Emma. I've always cared about you, even when our families made it impossible to show it." The simple honesty in his voice made Emma's breath catch. "Is that why you were watching my home that night?" Owen nodded, his expression turning serious. "I've made it a habit, checking on your place when I ride the ridge. Started after your mother died, when I couldn't offer condolences properly. Felt like the one thing I could do was keep an eye out, even if from a distance." The revelation touched Emma deeply. Her mother's death 3 years earlier had been a devastating blow, made worse by the isolation imposed by the feud. To think that Owen had been watching over her, all that time. "Thank you," she said softly. They reached Widow's Peak just before noon. The view was breathtaking, the entire valley spread below them, the patchwork of ranches and farms, the silver thread of the river winding through it all. In the distance, the snow-capped mountains formed a jagged line against the blue sky. "It's beautiful," Emma breathed, dismounting to stand at the edge of the lookout. Owen joined her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "From up here, you can't see the property lines," he observed. "It's all just one landscape." Emma understood what he wasn't saying directly. "Like the underground spring," she murmured, "connected in ways we can't always see." Owen turned to face her then, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "Emma, I don't know if this tentative peace between our families will last. I hope it will, but I can't promise that. What I can promise is that my feelings for you have never changed, not since we were young." Emma's heart raced at his words. "And what feelings are those?" she asked, scarcely daring to believe what she was hearing. Instead of answering with words, Owen took her hand, his touch gentle despite the calluses from years of ranch work. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. When they parted, Emma kept her eyes closed for a moment, savoring the sensation. "I've thought about that for years," she admitted, opening her eyes to find Owen watching her with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "So have I," he confessed, "even when I thought it would never be possible." Emma smiled, feeling as though her heart might burst with happiness. "And now," Owen said, taking both her hands in his, "I'm hoping this is just the beginning." They stayed on the peak for hours, talking as they never had before, sharing hopes and dreams and fears. Owen spoke of his desire to modernize his ranch, to implement the newest farming techniques he'd read about. Emma confided her ambition to someday teach at the Lovelock School while maintaining her connection to ranch life. They were so absorbed in each other that they almost didn't notice the gathering clouds until the first fat raindrops began to fall. "We should head back," Owen said reluctantly, helping Emma to her feet. "Your father will have my hide if I bring you home soaked through." They rode quickly, but the storm moved faster, catching them when they were still an hour from the Owens ranch. By the time they reached the house, they were both drenched, their clothes plastered to their skin. Jonathan met them at the door, his expression a mixture of concern and disapproval. "Inside, both of you," he ordered. "Emma, go change before you catch your death." As Emma hurried to her room, she heard her father addressing Owen in low tones. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was surprisingly civil given the circumstances. When she returned to the kitchen in dry clothes, she found Owen wrapped in a blanket by the fire, a cup of hot coffee in his hands. Her father was sitting opposite him, their conversation pausing as she entered. "I was just telling Owen that he's welcome to stay until the rain lets up," Jonathan said, his tone making it clear this was a concession rather than an invitation. "Thank you, sir," Owen replied, equally formal. Emma sat beside Owen, not quite touching but close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him. Her father's eyes narrowed slightly at their proximity, but he made no comment. "Owen showed me the view from Widow's Peak," Emma said, attempting normal conversation. "You can see all the way to the Carson River on a clear day." Jonathan nodded, his expression softening slightly at the mention of the landmark. "Your mother and I picnicked there when we were courting," he revealed, surprising Emma with this glimpse into his past. "She loved the wildflowers that grow on the north slope." Owen glanced at Emma, a silent communication passing between them. "The lupines are blooming now," he said to Jonathan. "Purple and blue covering the whole hillside." A shadow of grief passed over Jonathan's face, quickly suppressed. "Mary always said they were the color of heaven," he murmured. The moment of shared remembrance created an unexpected bond between the three of them, a recognition of common humanity that transcended old grievances. When the rain finally stopped and Owen prepared to leave, Jonathan walked him to the door, their conversation too quiet for Emma to hear. But she saw her father extend his hand, saw Owen shake it firmly, and felt a surge of hope that perhaps the healing between their families had truly begun. Over the next few weeks, Owen became a regular visitor at the Owens ranch. Sometimes he brought his men to continue work on the barn's interior. Other times he came alone, ostensibly to discuss ranch business with Jonathan, but inevitably finding time to speak privately with Emma. Their courtship progressed slowly, respectful of the still fragile peace between their families. They rode together on Sundays after church, sometimes accompanied by Emma's brothers, sometimes alone with Jonathan's grudging permission. They exchanged books and letters, sharing thoughts too intimate for public conversation. Emma found herself falling deeper in love with each passing day, discovering new facets of Owen to admire: his quiet intelligence, his gentle humor, his unwavering integrity. Even her father had begun to acknowledge Owen's good qualities, though he remained reserved in his approval. The engineer from Carson City confirmed Miguel's claim about the water source. A single underground aquifer fed both ranches, dividing naturally through geological formations that directed the flow to two separate springs. The discovery removed the last substantive basis for the feud, though years of animosity weren't so easily erased. Still, progress continued. Jonathan and Owen began cautiously discussing the possibility of cooperating on certain aspects of their operations, sharing equipment during harvest, combining cattle drives to save on manpower. Small steps toward a partnership that would benefit both families. Autumn arrived, painting the valley in gold and russet. The new barn stood completed, sturdy and spacious, ready for the winter ahead. On a crisp October evening, the Owens family hosted a small gathering to celebrate the harvest and the barn's completion, inviting the Thorntons and a few neighbors who had helped during the rebuilding. Emma wore her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes. She had spent extra time on her hair, pinning it up with her mother's combs in a style more sophisticated than her usual practical braid. Owen arrived with his father, Harrison Thornton, a surprise that sent a ripple of tension through the gathering. The elder Thornton had been notably absent throughout the barn raising, his bitterness toward the Owens family apparently deeper than his son's. Jonathan stiffened at the sight of his old adversary, but stepped forward with remarkable composure. "Harrison," he greeted, extending his hand after only a moment's hesitation. "Welcome to our home." Harrison, a tall man with the same strong features as his son but with gray now dominating his once dark hair, regarded Jonathan's hand with obvious suspicion before slowly taking it. "Jonathan," he replied, his voice gravelly with age and emotion. "Nice barn you've got here." The simple compliment, delivered without sarcasm, seemed to ease some of the tension. Jonathan nodded his thanks, and the two patriarchs moved inside, maintaining a careful distance but at least occupying the same room without open hostility. Owen found Emma by the punch bowl, his eyes appreciative as they took in her appearance. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Emma blushed, pleased by his admiration. "I wasn't sure your father would come," she said, glancing toward where the older men stood in uncomfortable silence across the room. "Neither was I," Owen admitted. "But when I told him I intended to speak with your father about something important tonight, he insisted on coming." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "Something important?" Owen's smile held a secret. "Later," he promised, "when the time is right." The evening progressed with surprising harmony. The shared meal broke down some of the awkwardness, with conversation gradually flowing more naturally. Emma noticed her father and Harrison tentatively discussing cattle prices, their lifelong experience in the same business overcoming years of silence. After dinner, one of the neighbors produced a fiddle and another a harmonica. The furniture was pushed aside, creating space for dancing in the small living room. Owen approached Emma with formal courtesy, extending his hand. "May I have this dance, Miss Owens?" Emma placed her hand in his, aware of their fathers watching from opposite sides of the room. "You may, Mr. Thornton." They moved together with natural grace, their bodies finding an easy rhythm as if they had danced together 100 times before. Emma was conscious of Owen's hand at her waist, warm and steady, of the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him, of the tenderness in his eyes as he gazed down at her. "Everyone's watching us," she murmured, though she found she didn't mind. "Let them," Owen replied, echoing her own words from the night of the fire. "I'm proud to be seen with you, Emma Owens." As the evening wore on, more couples joined the dancing. Emma was surprised and touched to see her father ask Mrs. Peterson, a widow from the neighboring farm, for a dance. It was the first time since her mother's death that she had seen him participate in any social activity with genuine pleasure. Eventually, Owen led Emma outside onto the porch, where the cool night air provided a refreshing contrast to the warmth inside. The moon hung low and full over the mountains, casting silver light across the valley. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," Owen said, his voice quiet but clear in the still night. "About what I want and what I hope for." Emma's pulse quickened. "And what do you hope for?" she asked. Owen turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "A life with you, Emma, a partnership in every sense of the word." Before she could respond, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a delicate gold ring with a single pearl nestled in the center. "It was my mother's," he explained, his voice thick with emotion. "She made me promise to give it only to a woman I loved completely, without reservation." Emma felt tears welling in her eyes as Owen dropped to one knee before her. "Emma Owens, I have loved you since we were children stealing apples from Old Man Weber's orchard. I love you now as the strong, compassionate woman you've become. And I will love you for all the days of my life, if you'll do me the honor of becoming my wife." Emma could scarcely breathe through the joy expanding in her chest. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Owen, I will marry you." Owen slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the love and promise his words had expressed. They were so absorbed in each other that they didn't notice the door opening until Jonathan cleared his throat loudly. Emma and Owen broke apart to find both their fathers standing in the doorway, their expressions unreadable in the dim light. "Sir," Owen began, his arm still around Emma's waist, "I've asked Emma to marry me and she has accepted. I hope we have your blessing." Jonathan looked from Owen to his daughter, noting her radiant happiness, the proud way she stood beside the man she had chosen. Slowly he nodded. "If this is what you truly want, Emma, then you have my blessing," he said, his gruff voice softened by emotion. Harrison Thornton stepped forward then, his weathered face solemn. "The Thorntons and the Owens joined after all these years," he mused. "Who would have thought it?" "Perhaps it was always meant to be," Jonathan suggested, surprising everyone with this philosophical observation. "Water from one source divided for a time, flowing back together." Harrison considered this, then extended his hand to Jonathan. "To new beginnings," he offered. Jonathan clasped his old rival's hand firmly. "To new beginnings," he agreed. Emma leaned against Owen, overwhelmed by the significance of the moment. Their love had accomplished what years of negotiations and arguments had failed to do. It had brought healing to a division that had seemed permanent. As word of their engagement spread through Lovelock over the following days, Emma was touched by the community's support. Even those who remembered the height of the feud seemed pleased to see it end with a union, rather than further bitterness. Owen and Emma began making plans for a spring wedding, giving them time to prepare while avoiding the worst of winter's chill. They decided to build their new home on the boundary between the two ranches, a physical representation of the bridge they were creating between their families. Construction began immediately, with men from both ranches working side by side. The house took shape quickly, a sturdy two-story structure with wide porches and ample windows to catch the desert light. Emma worked alongside the builders when she could, wanting to be part of creating this symbol of their future together. As winter settled over the valley, bringing short days and long, cold nights, Emma and Owen continued their courtship under the watchful but increasingly approving eyes of their families. They shared holiday celebrations, rotating between the two homes and creating new traditions that honored both families' histories. Emma discovered depths to Owen she had only glimpsed before: his passion for education that matched her own, his dreams of implementing scientific farming methods to improve their yields, his deep connection to the land that had shaped generations of his family. In turn, Owen came to admire Emma's resilience, her quick intelligence, her ability to see possibilities where others saw only obstacles. They complemented each other naturally, their strengths balancing their weaknesses, their shared values creating a solid foundation for their future. By early spring, their house was nearly complete, and wedding preparations were in full swing. Emma's aunt arrived from Sacramento to help with the dress, while the women of Lovelock contributed their talents to creating a celebration worthy of the occasion. The wedding day dawned clear and mild, the desert blooming with early wildflowers that dotted the landscape with color. In the newly completed church at the center of town, Emma stood beside her father, her heart racing with anticipation. "You look just like your mother," Jonathan said, his voice thick with emotion as he prepared to walk her down the aisle. "She would have been so proud of you today." Emma squeezed his arm, unable to speak through the lump in her throat. They had come so far since that night of the fire, healing not just the rift between families, but also strengthening their own bond as father and daughter. The simple ceremony united Emma and Owen before the entire community of Lovelock. Their vows, written together during the long winter evenings, spoke of partnership, respect, and a love that had withstood separation and opposition to emerge stronger. As Owen slipped the gold band beside his mother's pearl ring on Emma's finger, she felt the weight of history and hope combined in that simple circle of metal. They were creating something new from the broken pieces of the past. The celebration afterward, held in the Owens' new barn, brought together people who had once taken sides in the feud, now united in celebrating the love that had helped heal those divisions. Even Harrison and Jonathan, seated at the same table, found common ground in their shared stories and mutual pride in their children. When Emma and Owen slipped away to their new home as the festivities continued, they stood for a moment on the porch, taking in the view of both ranches stretching out before them, no longer divided but united under their stewardship. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thornton," Owen said softly, lifting Emma into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Emma wrapped her arms around his neck, remembering with vivid clarity the night he had carried her from the burning barn. From rescue to romance, their journey had been unexpected and perfect. "I love you, Owen Thornton," she whispered as he set her down in the front hall of their home, "for saving my life and for making it worth living." Owen's kiss was both tender and passionate, a promise of all the nights to come in their shared future. "I think we saved each other," he replied, and Emma knew he spoke the truth. In the years that followed, Emma and Owen built a life that honored both their families' legacies while forging their own path. Their first child, a son named Jonathan Harrison Thornton, arrived a year after their wedding, bringing joy to both grandfathers who competed good-naturedly for the baby's attention. The combined Thornton-Owens ranch prospered under their joint management, with Emma implementing the educational theories she studied through correspondence courses, and Owen introducing innovative breeding and farming techniques. They became leaders in the community, respected for their fairness and progressive thinking. 2 years later, their daughter Mary Elizabeth joined the family, followed by twin boys, David and Samuel, named for Emma's brothers who had by then established ranches of their own nearby. The story of how their love began with a desperate rescue from a burning barn became family legend, told and retold to each generation of children. It served as a reminder that even from destruction and conflict, something beautiful could emerge if given the chance to grow. On the 5th anniversary of the fire, Owen took Emma back to Widow's Peak, where they had shared their first kiss during that tentative courtship. The valley below had changed: more farms, a growing town, the railroad now passing through Lovelock. But the essential beauty remained, the desert and mountains existing in perfect harmony. "You ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Emma asked as they shared a picnic lunch on the sunny slope. "If there hadn't been a fire that night?" Owen considered the question, his hand finding hers as naturally as breathing. "I believe we would have found our way to each other eventually," he said. "Some things are meant to be, fire or no fire." Emma leaned against his shoulder, watching their children playing among the lupines that carpeted the hillside in purple and blue, the colors of heaven, as her mother had said. "I'm glad we didn't have to wait any longer than we did," she said. "Every day with you is precious to me." Owen kissed her temple, his love for her evident in the gentle touch. "And to me," he agreed. "From the moment I saw that barn in flames, I knew I couldn't lose you again. Not to fire, not to feuds, not to anything this world might throw at us." Emma turned her face to his, the years having only deepened her love for this man who had risked everything to save her. "You never will," she promised. "Some flames burn forever." And as they gathered their children and made their way home in the golden afternoon light, Emma knew with absolute certainty that the fire that had nearly taken her life had instead given her everything she could have ever wanted: a love as enduring as the mountains and as life-giving as water flowing from a hidden spring, nourishing all it touched with the promise of renewal and hope.